Before we get into adding lights and materials, I'd like to introduce you to two more functions that are really, really useful and can generate some pretty interesting results, and that's duplicate and duplicate special. So I need some objects to duplicate, so I'm going to, again, just quickly create some forms. By creating a curve, closing that curve using planar. Let me reverse the direction on this. And then maybe making some, go to the control vertex here and changing this patch a little bit. And to duplicate, let me delete this curve. I don't need it anymore, but so we don't copy and paste in Maya. What we do is we use duplicate, and you can get to duplicate by edit and duplicate, or you can just hit Command D, and what that will do is that will create a, I just undid those, that will create a second version of your object. They are, they're not, there's no relationship between them. I can make edits to this one. For example, I can scale it, hit R and scale, and it won't affect the second copy. So again, Command D duplicates whatever you have selected. There's another cool function called duplicate special. And one thing that I want to mention before we duplicate special is something that you'll notice is that the pivot, right, the center of this object, once I created a planar surface, the center of my pivot shifted from being in the middle of the object to being in the origin. Now, this doesn't necessarily matter for moving things around, but maybe you saw when I scaled that it was scaling in relationship to the center, which changes if I'm scaling in the Z or the X. Okay, it's just gonna change the way it behaves and scales depending on not only scale, but actually more importantly, rotate. The pivot, where it's placed, will greatly affect how we rotate an object because we're going to rotate around the pivot. So this is something to be aware of. It also just designates the center or the origin of the object. So right now the origin of the object is here at the origin of the world space. But if I want to change that, I'm going to go up to modify and say center pivot. And what that'll do is that will bring that pivot back to the center of my object. And actually it's way up here in space because this planar surface, my control vertex is like way up here. You know, a better kind of way to show this might be, let's delete this surface here, is to generate a different form that's not a planar patch, but maybe create a loft. So let me, again, make a loft here. And a really simple way is just to create those two curves and then do some curling to it. So just add some kind of algorithmic procedural bending to the curve, and then I might do that again, give a little bit more. And then let me go in and actually just edit this a little bit. Make sure that I don't have, my surface won't necessarily overlap. I think my curling, maybe we'll just see how this looks and maybe make adjustments. Maybe I'll make an adjustment by pulling this out. Okay. So now I'm going to select these two. Let me get rid of this. These two curves, and let's loft between them. And now I have this lofted surface. right? And so this will be a little bit easier. This is right in the middle, my pivot point now. Another way that I can edit the pivot point is by not pressing Command D, but just pressing the D key. And you'll see this little icon pop up, and this allows me to manually move the pivot. And I can move it along the axes, and I can reorient the center of my object by, again, pressing D, and then using either the axis indicators here, or using, or kind of freely moving in the world space. And then again, if I want to recenter it, I can go to Modify and Center Pivot. Okay, so those are just some good tools to be aware of. Okay, I have this lofted surface now, and now I'd like to use Duplicate Special to duplicate it. Let me go to Edit, Duplicate Special, but I want to hit this little option box so I can see what my options are. So I am able to say how many copies, and then what kind of operation I want to perform between each copy. So let's say I'd like to move it in the X direction. Let's say 3 in the X and 3 in the Y. And then let's rotate it around the Z by 30 degrees. And I want to make 10 copies. Let's see what this does. If I hit Duplicate Special, now you see I've generated that same form and have been rotated around here. So I've made, and what I can do is maybe pull them apart. So let me go ahead and pull them apart a little bit and gives a little bit more room between them, but now I'm generating a really interesting form. And I can still manipulate it while I have it selected. Right, so I'm able to, in this case, I'm kind of like revolving this. Let me go back and show you something else. If I add Duplicate Special, let's do all of those functions, and then also change the Z position to 3, and let's rotate it as well along the X at 30 degrees. Give 10 copies, apply, and now we have a kind of spiraling or helixing. Let me pull these apart a bit. And now you can see we can really generate some really interesting forms from one form. We can start to kind of build off of that one form.